we had a parent come through our parent coaching program. I remember being completely stunned watching this mom interact with her son because she was so attuned, paying very close attention to what he was doing, what he was saying, but she was so relaxed. And she also seemed to have this natural enjoyment of him. She wasn't trying to get him to play any differently than he was playing. She wasn't trying to get him to say anything in particular, right? And he wasn't yet speaking. It was very difficult for him to respond or have any back and forth interaction with any of us, certainly with me and really with his mom at this point. But she said to me, and this just leveled me. She said, I just love him, and I actually don't care if he ever talks. I just want him to be happy with the person he is. And I love him, and I don't need him to be any different than he is right now. And what's amazing is that what's unfolded for him is this dramatic developmental progress that he has made in terms of his ability to communicate, his ability to tune into other people and actually pull other people into interactions with him very actively. And I really believe it's because he had this repeated experience with his mom of I'm okay as I am. Because he has this safety and security, I really believe that it had a massive ripple effect again on his development.
So after a lot of episodes, we're coming to the final edition of Autism for Parents. This is the last edition of this podcast. We're going to be transitioning into a new podcast called The Beautiful Reality of Autism, which will launch very soon, and you'll hear a lot more about it. And Andrew, hopefully you will appear as a guest on one of the episodes for that as well. But for this last episode, I thought we might look at what we think are the most important pieces of advice, the most important topics that we've talked about, the most important takeaways that we want parents to have from this whole series. What would you say? What sort of things stand out for you as being really important?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that question, Guy. I think if I see if I can boil it down, at least what's coming through in the moment is this sort of overarching theme of trust versus mistrust. And more specifically, what I mean is that um, I think I continue to recognize from my perspective as a professional just how deeply a mistrust of autistic children and people is baked into all of the systems of care that have been developed, as well as societies in general. There is such a pervasive sense of mistrust that comes, in many ways, largely from this kind of pathology, um, deficiency, impairment model of autism that we've all been swimming in for many generations. Um, and it seems to me like a big theme that we've been addressing together is how to shift that and then specifically be able to truly cultivate greater trust in our autistic children and as well as in our parents and families. And that can be an incredibly challenging thing to do when we have so much training and conditioning to look at our children again through more of a deficit problem, almost disease lens. And so I don't think this is a small thing or an easy shift to make. But I think much of what you and I have talked about and much of what really we're trying to do at transforming autism is truly to transform the perspective that we have, um, and really shift it again from a sense of deeper trust in the wisdom, the potential, the natural capacity that's there for autistic children to learn, to grow, to develop, to really deeply cultivate that. And what that's going to require is we're going to have to bump up against continuously a lot of our own learning and conditioning to see our kids through the lens of deficits, and impairments, or as kind of collections of difficulties that need to be fixed or changed or addressed. Um, and I would say it's also very important to not overlook or minimize some of the challenges that can come with having a differently wired nervous system, particularly in societies that were designed and developed for um, non autistic brains and bodies. So, I think this is part of it. Like, we're talking about um, addressing disability, and ableism in a very, very deep and profound way. And I think that you and I are trying to dial down how we can do this in our thoughts and our actions and our interactions with our autistic children, as well as in the ways that we're supporting families. But that's what I would say in conclusion, that I really think part of what we're trying to do here is have everyone consider um, the possibility that we can all develop a much deeper, greater trust in our children, that they're doing what they're doing for good reason. They're struggling in the ways that they are for really good reasons. And if we can step back and reflect and trust more in um, what they're doing and why they're doing it, and then find ways to support them that maximize our sense of trust in them, I think we'll get to a different place.
What might that look like in a family? You've got a family who want to marry these two things that you talked about. They want to have an empowering vision of their child, to
Mhm.
sort of see them as full of self-respect and distinctive individuality of their own right, which is equally as valid as and important as anybody else's responsibility. And also at the same time to acknowledge any difficulties they might have, not as a result of autism, but as a result of being autistic in a society where the whole set of expectations and cultural norms are based around a totally different sort of mindset, and anybody would have challenges in an environment that was not optimized for them. So how would a family, how would a parent
Yeah,
in daily life manage to negotiate these things?
yeah. I mean, I think that's really the greatest challenge, isn't it, for parents to continually do this back and forth dance of wanting to care for their children and help their children navigate through a world that doesn't understand and support them. And so parents want to help their kids function within a world that essentially doesn't really see or value who they more naturally are. And so there's this constant tension for parents between trying to be advocates for their children, as well as trying to help their children function again. And so for me, one of the foundations of that is really truly recognizing and honoring um, children's natural way of communicating and interacting with the world. And so what that means is um, we as professionals or as parents have to start with this way of engaging and interacting with our children that truly recognizes and honors what they're communicating, the ways that they're playing and interacting with the world, before we move into this mode of trying to change or fix or alter what they're doing. And that's a very, very difficult thing to do in a system and in society that is saying, this way to do things is normal and this way is deviant, and we have to push our children from deviance to normalcy. And I see that coming up all the time, just simply in for example, when parents are playing with their children. It can be so difficult for parents to slow down their own impulses to get their children to play more normally or typically with toys or materials or objects. And so a big part of that work is actually, internal in some ways, where parents have to work on not only shifting their attitudes and beliefs, but actually slowing themselves down, calming themselves down, so they can just simply tune in more to what their children are naturally doing.
Yeah.
And so I think that, um, and also parents have to walk out with their children, move out into a very cruel world with their children, and into a world that will judge and criticize and target their children for not looking or acting in particularly like in normal quote unquote ways. So I think it's an incredibly agonizing setup for parents to be trying to advocate for their kids, be with their kids, be supportive, be loving, be accepting, and be at the same time navigating through this, in some ways, I think what can be an assault from the world, which is, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with your child?
Yeah, because even
You
if
know,
you're like listening to your intuition and connecting with your child in a very natural way, as soon as you go out of the place where you are, or even you in your head you go out of that moment where you're just you and your child alone, you're getting messages every moment. This isn't okay. You need to become different to how you are. How would you say parents can best deal with that?
I think parents can best deal with that by first just becoming aware of that battle and struggle that they're in the middle of every day, um, to really sort of tune into their own reactions and responses to their children's behavior, and really have an understanding that they're going to be interacting with their children sometimes, um, in ways that are responses to this kind of pressure that they're feeling from the outside world. And so I think the challenge is to recognize that. And I think when there is an awareness of that, a recognition of that, parents can then begin to kind of slow themselves down and take a few breaths and say, how do I want to respond to or be with my child, perhaps in a way that's different than how the world is responding to my child. Or that, and I think a big part of it is what the term that I think I've talked about before is sort of no pressure interactions. That, like, what it's going to require for me as a professional, certainly, but I think for parents as well, is to really find ways that I can approach a child in a way that communicates, I'm with you, I'm interested in you, I'm listening to you, versus I'm going to tell you what to do to fit in, or I'm going to tell you what to do to act more normal or have more social success, right? If I can do that more consciously, more actively, I think our kids are going to experience all of their social interactions with us differently. I think what I have, one of the most powerful things that I've learned, and I've seen this with parents, and I've certainly experienced this in every interaction that I have with an autistic person, but actually with every person I interact with, that generally speaking, the more relaxed and just present and attentive I can be, and the more I listen versus the more I try to tell people what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, right? It's the more I can just show up and give someone a message. I'm really curious about you. I'm interested in you. Generally, the more safe that person feels with me, and the more people want to share themselves, and children want to share what they're curious about and interested in with me. And it's not that it's I've spent 35 years kind of cultivating some of these abilities, right? So I've had a lot of years of practice, and I still blow it all the time. I still get caught up in, I want this child to communicate more effectively with me. So I'm sort of gonna challenge them to communicate more in this moment. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, what I just created a very unsafe interaction for this child because I was pushing.
Mm.
Or I want to teach a child like how to play more in kind of a more socially typical way with a toy because I want them to have success in this preschool that where they're interacting with other children. And so again, I'll come in and I'll push or I'll force an interaction with a child and direct their play in a particular way that is completely confusing and not interesting to them. And I will all of a sudden stop myself in those moments and say, oh my gosh, I need to just kind of slow down and just connect more with this child, meet them where they are in play, and establish that trust and not be pressuring them to do something specific, say something specific. And when I'm able to do that, it's amazing to watch how kids' nervous systems respond to the safety that they feel, to the trust that they feel me also placing in them, that I'm going to be with you, but I don't need you to be a particular way with me. And then oftentimes there's enough trust and enough safety that kids have to, again, bring forth all of the stuff that's inside of them. But again, it's a moment to moment practice in many ways, Guy. That's the thing. There is no magic set of techniques or strategies. This is really about all of us learning how to show up in ways that are more sincerely, genuinely relaxed and accepting of our children so that they have room and space to be themselves. And that has to be the foundation. And again, we have this entire system that gives us a bunch of techniques to change their behavior. And we constantly have to be, um, in some ways, I want to say pushing against that, but not just internalizing that push and then forcing that on our children. And
There's an
that's not
impli
to say that again our children don't that it's not going to benefit them to learn skills, to learn how to brush their teeth, right? How to put their shoes on and do things that are very important for their development. But there's ways that we can do that that are, I think, slower and more gradual and more relaxed. And that starts with how we just show up in the interaction to begin with,
Mm.
without the pressure, the pushing that
I
happens so
guess
easily.
there's an implication to what you're saying, which is actually a very big thing for most families, but something that's worth actually sort of saying out loud because it's something that needs to um, we need to sort of take on board in order to be able to make progress. And that is that in order to sort of take that sort of approach with our children, there has to also be an acceptance, a real deep acceptance of the fact that it might be that my child ends up being different from the other children and not playing socially in the same way. Maybe they'll develop a social sense a lot later, and maybe it'll be a very different social sense, and maybe it'll be only with certain people or certain types of people that they will really connect. What would you say it takes to get to that level of acceptance? And then when you've got to that level of acceptance, what do you think that unlocks in
Mm,
terms of
mm,
possibilities to really serve our children and bring out
mm,
their full potential?
mm, mm. Yeah. I think it makes sense to answer that question by like illustrating it with a story of a particular mom that I've been supporting, and her son, and their kind of their path, right? So because it's so important, the how parents get there, I think, is so individual. Like every parent has their own particulars, coming to this with their own set of beliefs, perspectives, hopes, dreams for their child, and it's complex. What I saw happen with a particular mom and son is I think is really important to share, and I think illustrates something very, very powerful. Um, we had a parent come through our parent coaching program. Her son was 2.5, had just been diagnosed. Um, and I remember within the first 30 minutes I was with them being completely stunned watching this mom interact with her son, because she was so attuned to him in terms of very, paying very close attention to what he was doing, what he was saying. But she was so relaxed, and she also seemed to have this natural enjoyment of him. She wasn't trying to get him to play any differently than he was playing. She wasn't trying to get him to say anything in particular, right? And he wasn't yet speaking. He was making some sounds, but and what I saw unfolding in their interactions was just this sense that he, even though it was very difficult for him to, it seemed, respond or have any back and forth interaction with any of us, certainly with me, and really with his mom at this point. Um, but she said to me, and this just leveled me. She said, I just love him, and I actually don't care if he ever talks. I just want him to be happy with the person he is. And I love him, and I don't need him to be any different than he is right now. And of course, I almost like melted down and lost it and just started bawling in the room, because she was so sincere and it was so genuine. And I could feel just the deep love and the acceptance that she had for him. And she didn't need him to be any different than he was. And what's amazing is that what's unfolded for him over the last year or so is this dramatic developmental progress, these dramatic shifts that he has made in terms of his ability to communicate. Like he's now speaking, he's now communicating with words. His ability to tune into other people and actually pull other people into interactions with him very actively, has changed so dramatically. Um, and I really believe that it's because he had this repeated experience with his mom as his primary caregiver of, I'm okay as I am. There's nothing I have to do, and I'm not being pushed or forced to communicate in certain ways. I'm not overwhelmed and stressed because, I have to do these things that the adults around me are forcing me, pushing me to do. Now, it's not that they did get ultimately over time some intervention, like there was some communication therapy, some occupational therapy. And he was in a like sort of a supported preschool program. Um, but I really believe that, and this is what I continue to see with this guy, is that he, because he has this safety and security, right, with his mom, I really believe that it had a massive ripple effect again on his development, on his social motivation, on his drive to continue to do things that were difficult or challenging for him, because he didn't get the sense that he was making mistakes. He didn't get the sense that he was, not enough or not good enough. Right? He had this foundation of unconditional love and acceptance, and I really believe it's interesting because we know from child development. I mean, people talk about this all the time in child development research, that what kids most need is simply one person who is their champion, who gives them the sense that they're loved and valued and appreciated as they are, period, without the need to be changed or better. And I think that is fundamentally, I believe, what our kids need. Um, And so the question is, how do we get there? And I think we get there with deeper acceptance unconditionally for who our kids are right now. It has to start there.
It's really interesting, isn't it? That example you give? It's like because she was accepting of him, it gave him that loving acceptance to be able to achieve what she wasn't trying to push him to achieve.
Right.
And if she tried to push him to achieve that, what would have happened? It's very likely that he would have felt immense pressure and overwhelm at the expectation. He would have concluded that he wasn't good enough to achieve those things, that he wasn't capable of it because he wasn't at that moment able to meet the demands that she had of him. And it would have stopped, it would have given him such negative associations with becoming how she wanted him to become that it would have blocked him ever becoming how he wanted to become. And yet, by accepting how he was, by accepting any limitations, if they turned out to be limitations, what she was actually doing was empowering him to move beyond those limitations on his own terms, in his own way, without having to be driven, without having somebody else's acceptance riding on it, without having his own concept of self-esteem or self worth tangled up in it. And it sort of seems like the kindest thing that you could possibly do. And it seems to be the underlying theme of everything that we've been talking about in all different ways. Um, it's about that foundation of unconditional love and acceptance and understanding that comes from creating a relationship with your child. Every parent has love. Not every parent has acceptance. You know, acceptance is a much rarer thing because we're always trying to make our children into what we think is best for them, not realizing that our expectations are stopping them getting there. And understanding also is difficult because if you don't try to understand and accept the child on their own terms, you're not going to understand them properly as in who they are and what they're experiencing. And they will know that you're not understanding them and they will feel that they've not been understood. So it's so important to start with that acceptance and understanding from the very beginning. And it leads us to, I don't want to end the series without revisiting my favorite piece of Andrew Shahan wisdom. And I think just because it had an impact on me, it came to me at the time, and I know you and I talked about it before, some time before we talked about it on the program. But it was about this question I asked you about, we were talking about with my son, whether we should get him used to the hardness that would come in the world by introducing some element of it in a very controlled way in our family life to try and get him used to it. And your answer was really profound and extremely helpful. And I wonder if we can maybe finish the series with you repeating and explaining this answer again.
I wish we could, but I have no idea what my answer was.
Oh, okay. Well, listen, I'll give you a prompt and you can finish it. But it was like
Please
it was
help me.
along the lines of it's much more beneficial for the child to give them a safe and protected environment where you're not feeding them some of the harshness of the world to get them used to it,
Mhm.
because there's a price. And I'm paraphrasing here. I'm putting it in my words, but I'm sure I'm sure it's in line with what you're saying. There's a price to trying to get them used to it, and that is that they will experience something from you that takes away what they really need, this foundation of love and acceptance. They'll experience a pressure, they'll experience a sense that they're not acceptable, and that's why they deserve this harshness or whatever, and they will lose this feeling that their parents are somebody that they can always rely on in all circumstances for unconditional acceptance and understanding. Um, so, yeah, I'll pass over to you to sort of elaborate on that now.
No, I think, I would still say that I do think that sometimes in the name of, and maybe I'll elaborate on this piece of it, I do see this continuously with parents and families, this kind of this um, notion that they have to feel like they have to push their kids, continuously to kind of toughen up or to face some of the harshness of the world. And there is some important wisdom there. Maybe I haven't said this before. There's important wisdom the parents have, that they're continually in this role of being a bridge, a connector between the safe world at home, or between whatever, wherever their kids are developmentally, and their kids kind of more natural ways of being, and the kind of cruelty, harshness of an ableist world that has no tolerance, no patience for difference. So there is this wisdom that parents have, that we have to help our kids navigate their way through that world, because otherwise, if we just create this beautiful protective bubble, our kids, as soon as they have any contact with the outside world, are going to completely fall apart, right? And that, I think there's truth there. Um, I think what I was getting at, and what I think is so important, is that sometimes, first of all, that push, what can happen with that push, if it's not done very thoughtfully and gently and supportively and gradually, is that it can strain the parent child connection and relationship. And that has to be the primary source of our kids' security and safety. So the tricky part is to slowly, gradually introduce our kids to some of the challenges that they're going to face in the world. Like a preschool classroom, for example, is a tremendously challenging, busy, overwhelming social environment. And many parents will say, I'm going to keep my kid, I'm going to either homeschool my child, or just keep them in a more protected bubble, because I don't want them to be overwhelmed and stressed in that preschool environment. And I would always say, I understand that. And it's good to want to protect and support our children. And can we do both? Is there a way that we can support your child to move towards um, a more challenging social environment, but do it in a very gradual, supportive way? So, again, what usually gets knocked out is because society is saying, here's the preschool, we're waiting for you, right? And the parent is like at home with their child saying, oh, my child is not ready, they're not there, they can't. It almost looks like there has to be this like giant leap that's made. Okay, we're just going to go from home protected bubble to full throttle in the preschool, and there's nothing in between. And I would say there's a million steps, maybe not a million, but there's a lot of steps in between that we can help parents think about, that are gonna help a child become more exposed to, very slowly, comfortable with very slowly, a peer play or social play environment. We're gonna just start by watching. We're going to start by being at a park and just sitting with our child, being with our child, playing with them while there's other kids around. And we're not going to push them to do anything. Or look at your friend, go play with your friend, go talk to your friend, go share, right? We're not going to do any of that yet. We're just going to say there's this whole world out here that can be very overwhelming and terrifying. And we're just going to be with you and help you begin to observe it a little bit more, and pay a little bit more attention to it, and help you understand what's happening in that world. We're going to talk about what the kids around you are doing. Oh, he's bouncing the ball. You can see that. Yeah, that's what sometimes kids do with balls. We're just gonna slowly peek out and look at this busy social world around you. And so that example, I think, is, I'm trying to make it really concrete, but I think the point is that there's so many ways to move our kids in a very supportive, gradual way towards some of the social challenges, or the social world that we want them to be a part of. And what usually backfires is parents pushing too fast, too hard. And then what happens is the child's experience is, wait a minute, this source of safety and security that I had with my parent is suddenly disappearing. I feel terrified and overwhelmed. I don't know why I'm being pushed to do this. I'm just shutting down, or I'm and my parent is actually not there to sort of hold me and really just gradually, how can I say, in a more nourishing way,
Yeah.
isn't there to say it's okay. If you need to
Yeah.
take a step back right now, it's okay. We'll try again tomorrow or whatever. We, and including me as a professional, get caught up in, we've got to go, let's teach, let's push, let's
Yeah.
push. And our kids then the relationship starts to become more of a source of anxiety and strain
Yeah.
versus security and safety.
Yeah. So
That's
we
a
want to
very delicate
mediate. We want to
balance.
mediate
Yeah.
their environment so that what would otherwise be overwhelming and stressful and confusing becomes safe and navigable.
Yes.
And we don't want to become the agent of the stress, which is often
Yes.
the temptation, because that's not a way to help the child progress, and it takes so much away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, in all of this, I am continually reminded that I have the luxury, in some ways, of being a professional. Um, as a professional, in some ways, it is easier for me to stay a bit more detached, a bit less emotionally worked up or geared up about how to do this, how to do this gradual supporting, when parents have these deep emotional bonds with their children and can be so much more emotionally connected to their kids. This can be much more difficult because parents are feeling stressed, feeling overwhelmed, feeling pressured, responding to the judgments of the world, the social pressures of the world, and are trying to sort of do all of this at the same time. And it can be incredibly challenging. So I don't want to minimize those forces, and because I think they're real for parents. And I would say a big thing is, again, parents leaning into each other to talk about what this is like. And this is what I see over and over again with parents and families. It's just the level of isolation that parents are struggling with constantly, where they don't feel like people really get what they're dealing with every day.
Yeah.
And so it can be incredibly powerful for parents that are in parallel raising autistic children, to just have conversations about this with each other and say, oh my gosh, you had that experience at the grocery store too. Like, how did you work through that? How did you address that? And how did you keep yourself calm in the middle of that? Like, parents have so much wisdom that they need to share with each other around exactly these issues, these challenges. Yeah.
That's an important note to finish on.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, thank you so much for all of these really incredible conversations that we've had over. It's been a few years that we've been doing this, isn't it? On and off. And it's coming to an end now. I've really appreciated this opportunity to do all these episodes with you. So
Hmm.
thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with everybody.
Hmm. Guy, thank you. It's been like such an honor, really, to share any of what I've learned over the years with you and the community. And it really is, in some ways, I have learned and grown in more ways than I could have possibly imagined. Really from the children, from my relationships and connections with the children and with their families. And so it has been, I have been the recipient, really, of the gifts. I have, yeah, I had no idea how much I would learn and grow over the decades, and I still am. There's no end to the learning. And I would say, just to say this at the end, Guy, and um, going back to the trust piece, and a lot of these things that we've described and we've talked about, I want to encourage parents to, like, every time that I've gone back and read your book, and I've read it multiple times, there's so much in there about these themes and about your own journey, your own story with, for example, learning how to trust in your son and his wisdom. And sometimes it was hard to see why he was doing what he was doing, but you have these, there's so many pages and chapters in your book where you talk about what you learned, and how much, even something months later that you had been through that you didn't quite understand was happening with him, made complete sense over time. And so I really encourage parents to, to read your book, to read, there are many amazing resources out there, but I think the journey that you went through, again, when parents think about how to put some of what we're describing into action, into practice, you're sharing your story has, again, you don't necessarily, your story and journey doesn't represent all families, but I think there's some clarity and some concreteness there just from you sharing your story that I think could really benefit parents. And I want more parents to write more books like yours, because we need less professional manuals and more parent stories. So, yeah.